Every single day, an oil tanker loads crude in Saudi Arabia, and the buyer pays in dollars. A factory in Vietnam ships electronics to Europe, and the invoice is in dollars. Routine transactions happening thousands of miles apart between entirely foreign parties are almost universally settled in one specific currency. To put that scale into perspective, the United States has a domestic population of roughly 330 million people. Yet its currency prices the trade, debt, and commodities of a global economy comprising 8 billion people. This extreme financial ubiquity did not emerge inevitably from the logic of free markets. It is the direct result of a specific set of decisions made by a single country at a precise moment in history, a carefully engineered system designed to lock the rest of the world into its financial orbit. By July 1944, the pre-war classical gold standard had completely collapsed under the weight of the Great Depression and competitive currency devaluations. With European economies shattered by war, Allied nations recognized they needed to build a completely new architecture for international trade. That new system was negotiated at the Mount Washington Hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. Delegates from 44 nations gathered to secretly draft the rules that would govern the post-war economy. The conference was defined by a clash of two competing plans. John Maynard Keynes proposed a neutral, supranational currency called the Bancor to settle trade balances fairly. But the chief international economist of the U.S. Treasury, Harry Dexter White, demanded a completely different arrangement, a system anchored exclusively to the U.S. dollar. White's plan won, but not because of its economic merits. The United States held approximately 2/3 of the world's monetary gold and was actively financing the Allied war effort. The American delegations simply had the physical and financial leverage to dictate terms. The resulting agreement legally tethered every major currency to the dollar and the dollar to gold. This arrangement granted the United States an exorbitant privilege. It could run permanent trade deficits, essentially buying goods from the rest of the world with dollars that foreign central banks were now obligated to hold as reserves. By the late 1960s, enormous deficit spending on domestic programs and the Vietnam War forced the U.S. to print far more dollars than it had gold to back them. In August 1971, President Richard Nixon abruptly suspended the dollar's convertibility into gold, terminating the core promise of the Bretton Woods system. Without gold backing, the dollar required a new anchor. National Security Advisor Henry Kissinger identified an opportunity in the 1973 oil crisis. The United States negotiated a secret arrangement with Saudi Arabia. America would provide military protection and weapons in exchange for a commitment to price all Saudi oil exclusively in U.S. dollars. Saudi Arabia used its influence to ensure the rest of OPEC followed suit. Because every nation on Earth needed to import energy, every nation suddenly had a mandatory need to hold U.S. dollars. They then took the excess dollars they earned and reinvested them back into U.S. Treasury bonds. Oil effectively replaced gold as the structural backing for the American currency. Two massive pieces of financial infrastructure secured this arrangement. First, the SWIFT banking network routed the vast majority of international transfers through dollar clearing systems. Second, the deep liquidity of the U.S. Treasury market provided the only safe place for foreign central banks to park their massive new dollar reserves. The mandatory pricing of energy, combined with inescapable banking infrastructure, created a powerful network externality. The dollar became mandatory to use simply because everyone else was already using it, locking the global economy into an American financial ecosystem. Because the dollar clears primarily in the U.S., SWIFT's global messaging infrastructure is deeply integrated with correspondent banks in New York. This routing created a centralized bottleneck, secretly giving the United States the ability to intercept or block almost any international transaction. Washington weaponized this bottleneck. By exerting regulatory pressure, the U.S. could sever rival nations from the global payment system, isolating them entirely. The breaking point arrived in 2022, when the United States and its allies froze hundreds of billions of dollars in Russian central bank reserves. This demonstrated to every observing foreign government that their own savings were vulnerable. By turning financial infrastructure into an offensive weapon, the United States broke the core trust of the post-war system. It proved that dollar reserves held by foreign nations are not sovereign property, but conditional assets, entirely dependent on maintaining political alignment with Washington. That realization triggered an immediate reaction. Driven by the fear of future sanctions, foreign powers began a coordinated, aggressive push to build structural escape routes out of the dollar network. The BRICS coalition, initially led by Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, emerged as the primary architects of this resistance. They began developing alternative messaging networks and non-dollar clearing systems to bypass American infrastructure. Central banks deployed defensive financial tactics. China accelerated the internationalization of the yuan for cross-border trade settlement, while foreign nations embarked on a historic campaign to hoard physical gold, an asset that cannot be frozen or seized by a foreign power. The aggressive use of financial exile achieved a specific tactical goal, but it also created the exact geopolitical alignment required to justify the enormous cost of building a rival global banking infrastructure. This chart tracks the dollar's exact percentage share of global foreign exchange reserves since 2001. Over the past 2 decades, that share has steadily dropped from 73% down to approximately 58% today, providing hard mathematical evidence of structural de-dollarization. This structural decline is compounding with modern American policy instability. Aggressive tariff implementations and massive deficit spending are continuously introducing severe stagflationary pressures into the domestic American economy, steadily eroding foreign investor trust in the very bonds that anchor the global system. Because of the deep historical inertia of its massive infrastructure, the dollar is not going to collapse overnight. But the data shows that a gradual, multi-decade transition away from absolute dominance and toward a multipolar currency system is undeniably underway. The US dollar became the pricing language of the global economy not through the natural efficiency of markets, but through the deliberate exercise of raw power. And history consistently demonstrates that structural power is never permanent.